welcome to our interview with Raph and David from Playable Worlds. In this interview, we talk about the Kickstarter, why Playable Worlds has decided to crowdfund, and some insight into what you can expect from Stars Reach post-Kickstarter. Let's get into it. For starters, I guess if you both could introduce yourselves for people who aren't familiar with you.
Sure. So I'm Raph Koster. I am founder and CEO of Playable Worlds. And going back, I've been making MMOs and text mods now for a very long time, over 30 years. Legend Mud and Ultima Online, I was the original creative lead for Ultima Online, ran UO Live early on. So I did a lot of the original design work for that game. Star Wars Galaxies, I was the creative director for that. I worked on a Privateer Online that never saw the light of day in between those two, but oh well, too bad. I was chief creative officer at Sony Online for a few years, doing R&D and checking in on the milestones for all the games, right? Like Untold Legends and EverQuest and PlanetSide and all those others. But I didn't work on them day to day except for Untold Legends. I did actually work on that a fair bit. Then I left and I did a startup called MetaPlace. It was a web-based virtual world, UGC worlds. It was actually essentially a competitor to Roblox, only back in 2006 through 2009, 2010. That ended up getting swallowed up by Facebook Games. We ended up acquired by Playdom and Disney. The tech became the back end for Club Penguin. Probably served more players there than all the other games I'd ever made combined, for all I know. As well as making a bunch of MMO-light Facebook games. We made a bunch of Facebook games that were actually multiplayer that people could play with each other. Then after that, I did consulting for a long time, like 6 years, and did all kinds of things, multi-user cloud augmented reality for Google, and redesigning bar trivia for BuzzTime. So if you played bar trivia on a tablet at Buffalo Wild Wings, that was probably my game. And that probably also got more players than all of my MMOs combined. Yeah, and started Playable Worlds started working on it 2018, and we landed our first money in 2019. So there you go. That's the potted history.
And David?
Okay. I'm Dave Georgeson. I'm the game director for Stars Reach. I've been around a while also. Back at the dawn of time, I worked on the very first D&D games and the Mech Warrior 2 series, and like worked at Domark before it became IDOS, things like that. But after, say, the Mech Warrior 2 stuff that I did, I never stopped making online games after that. MMOs, I've been involved with, I ran PlanetSide, the original, and made an online MMO for Gaia Online called Oh My God, which was really popular. And then I came back to SOE after I had made some games for other folks, including like Tribes 2 and things, and then worked at SOE to overhaul the EverQuest series and turn it into free-to-play offerings, where we doubled the users and tripled the revenue kind of thing. And it worked so well for EverQuest 2 that we ended up doing the same thing for a lot of the games at SOE. And I ended up being the director of development for the EverQuest franchise, and shipped Landmark. And then we were working on EverQuest Next when the company got sold, and that was the end of that. But it was a great ride. So now I'm here to work with Raph on Stars Reach, because honestly, we paralleled a lot of ideas along the way. And as soon as I read about his stuff, I was like, dude, let me in.
So I think that's an important thing for a lot of what we're going to cover, and we're going to cover that down the line, is that this studio has a lot of veterans actually who've been making MMOs for a very long time. But moving on to your Kickstarter, I mean, everyone right now is kind of wary about Kickstarters, right? I think we've all become a little bit suspicious of them. Just the idea of crowdfunding, right? Because we don't often hear about the successes, especially whenever it comes to MMORPGs. We're often hearing a lot about the failures and the communities that feel remorse that they backed it and things like that. So I think to get us started, let's talk a little bit about your decision to move to crowdsourcing your funding. So why did you guys start, or why will you guys be launching a Kickstarter?
Yeah, so let me start by saying I really do get it about being burned with Kickstarters, right? We did not originally set out to go this route, right? When we said we didn't have plans to do this, like, last year, we were serious. We didn't have any plans to do this. We weren't going to do it. I'll tell you some of the reasons I have not been a fan of MMO Kickstarters. I've gotten to see it up close, right? Like I did some consulting on Crowfall. I wasn't on the team, but I would come in and give them advice for I'd fly out there and visit them for like a week at a time, maybe once, twice a year, right? And I got to see up close, Kickstarters can lead you down this dangerous scope creep garden path where you make promises in order to drive pledges, and then you find yourself unable to get them done in any reasonable amount of time because you overpromise, or you end up promising things that are that you didn't really understand what the impact of them would be. You know what I mean? Like, promising a lot of land or whatever in Crowfall, right? I don't like that, right? Like it's not just bad for the players, but it's tricky for the dev, right? You're trying to plan and scope and whatnot, and then you end up trapping yourself, right? And that's not a great place to be, right? I recognize that people have been burned a lot by others. I do think it's important that not all veteran devs are the same people, right? Like I think that's it might be obvious, but lumping everybody together, we're all very different people. So there's that. But yeah, the reason why we're here now is really because of the way that the overall gaming landscape has gone, right? The last few years for games have been pretty challenging. I think probably all of the readership of your site has seen how many layoffs there have been, how many studios have closed. I've seen stats that say that 10% of the entire gaming workforce has been laid off, which is pretty dramatic. There are a whole bunch of reasons why this happened. There was a glut of investment during COVID. And now we predate COVID, right? We started before COVID came along. But there were an awful lot of studios that got funded during COVID and then didn't find an audience. A lot of folks had money flood into the space because they saw gaming booming during COVID, right? Gaming grew disproportionately during COVID. And a lot of people built estimates of the future based on that boom, going, oh, look, the curve has changed permanently. And that was a misread of stats. That's not what was happening. And if anything, gaming flattened out after COVID. It was kind of a retreat, a backlash. And that meant that a lot of money got lost. And that meant that a lot of people pulled money back. And now they're waiting for the entire industry and sector to prove itself. There's a lot of ripple effects from that, right? The size of funding checks, the whether they are going to new starts versus existing ones, even what sort of people they give them to, right? Like, do they give them to teams making indie versus AAA? Do they give them to games that have AAA developer pedigrees, right? Because there's the question of how do you pick a team to invest in has become a thing, right? So all of this stuff is in the mix. And the bottom line is investment money is coming less in smaller checks and mostly for new start titles, not things that are in progress, regardless of how far along they are. So we're in this situation where we raised a pretty penny. We raised $38+ million to build this so far. But our budget's always said from day one that really to get the game done, we were looking at more than that, right? And our expectation had always been that during this time window, we would raise our last round needed. Well, here we are, and the money's dried up everywhere, right? So it doesn't mean that money isn't available. We do continue to raise money from people, and we are raising money from people, right? But the big thing now is skepticism to overcome among funders. They are saying things like, your game needs to be already out and making money before we believe that it can be successful. Or, where's your stats from being open to the public completely before they'll consider publishing these? And so that leaves titles like us in a bit of an awkward situation. And so our goal here is to prove to the market that, yeah, there is an audience that wants this, which we totally know and believe. We don't just believe, we know, right? Like, we've got data. So we need to just demonstrate that in order to tip some funders over the line.
I get that. And I guess something that you had mentioned was pretty important here. It's that, you do know that you have a following and that you have people who are interested in playing the game. And you also knew, many years ago that there was maybe this magic number that you would have to hit to bring this through. So I think the question that a lot of people are going to have in that situation is, like, how are the funds that you're going to raise in the Kickstarter, how's that going to be allocated really to, I guess, complete the game's development, or at least get it to a point where maybe you have, as you had stated on the Fireside Chat, maybe launched into an early access state where you're maybe making that money to show publishers like, hey, we actually have some revenue.
We believe that it does depend on how well the Kickstarter does, obviously, right? So there's flex there, but between the money that we're raising right now plus the Kickstarter, we can get out into early access.
So I would say, like, given that Stars Reach is already in a playable state right now, is there a specific milestone that the Kickstarter is going to help with that you need to hit, I guess? Or, obviously we're not talking specific numbers yet. I don't know if you guys even have a specific number on what you're trying to hit. Have you gotten that far down the line on what what the amount of the Kickstarter is, or are you just going to see, like, you have the idea but you're hoping for more, right?
We do have numbers, but I'm going to hold them back till the actual page is ready.
Okay.
Because we keep running models, right? Based on as the follower count changes, we end up having to update the models, and so we'd rather wait to announce that until we actually open the Kickstarter. The core milestone at this point would be to get to early access. That's really it. That would be an alpha early access, right? It's not the game is launched. I don't think a true commercial launch would be next year, not this year. But we can be in early access this year, absolutely.
And you had mentioned before that obviously you'll have these, and it's all going to depend on the amount of funding that you have. You've also talked a little bit about your putting a bit of, I guess it wouldn't really be assistance, but you're asking the community maybe to help you along with like, what they want to see in some regards in terms of like stretch goals and things like that. I mean, you announced this last week, I believe. So, I mean, you've got what? You're launching the Kickstarter in February, early February, late February. I'm not entirely sure. But have you given some thought to what players should expect in terms of like the stretch goals that they could potentially get, or any rewards that backers would be able to have, or even like the tiers that you might offer? Or is this something like that you again have been kind of determining based on your follower count?
Dave, this is all you. You're
describing my current life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're putting a lot of thought into it, trying to figure out exactly what players would want, and what would make them excited. As far as like, oh yeah, that's something I can actually sink my teeth into and actually value without going, pay to win. Raph and I are both very adamantly against pay to win. When we were discussing how we were going to set up like an in-game shop and everything like that way back when, it was all not pay to win. And then we're doing the same approach with the Kickstarter stuff too. But then the trick with that is then how to make stuff so that's actually really attractive for what people want. Well, yeah, we have multiple tiers and we do the stretch goals, and I mean all the things that you'd expect from a Kickstarter. And we're working that page out right now. So if you're asking for details, it's in too much flux. I need to work some more stuff out. There's a whole approval cycle with way too many people involved. I'm kidding, just the right amount of people. We have to nail it down, but we'll have it. Well, I mean, I don't know exactly when we're making this public, but it's soon.
Yeah. I think there's probably one, because I've seen this pop up. People have said, hey, would access to the game be a reward? That one, I think we can confidently say is a no-brainer. So that one's easy.
And that's I mean, obviously that's what we all want, right? We all want to get into the game. And I think that that's also another important distinction that you made on the Fireside Chat, is that you had stated that there's so much interest, right? But right now there's just not the infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit more about like how the Kickstarter would bring people into the game, I suppose?
Yeah, we need to scale a bunch of kinds of infrastructure, okay? Like, first, to go to true early access, as opposed to phases of testing, you are essentially live, right? So you need customer support tooling, to pick one example. You need, in our case, we need a bunch of the auto-scaling stuff for launching and spinning up and spinning down planets and zones on the fly. We've been architected to do that, but right now we don't have that running. We haven't tested it at scale. A big part of what we need to do is ramp up testing and get to the point where we're doing that prior to early access, right? We need to have that sorted to be able to do early access. And that actually is expensive, right? If you think about what that means, it means that we have to go from supporting our current player counts up to supporting a live services player count before we take any money. Because we're not, right? Like, and then you can start. And that's expensive. And that's, of course, why people do things like pre-sale founder packs or Kickstarters, right? Is to help cover that cost of ramping, because it does add up well before you actually open the doors and start charging people. So, yeah, we've got a variety of kinds of scaling things like that, we've done code work against it, but I guarantee it's going to break when we actually dump thousands of people in at once, right? Like, and tens of thousands at once even. That's what you expect to happen. That is why you test. It's just it's expensive tests, right? So yeah, all of that kind of stuff is infrastructure that we do in order to get to early access.
So that's also another interesting point. So we briefly talked about, or I had asked the question during the fireside chat about the potential of a contingency plan, and you brought up things like selling founders packs and things like that. So let's say for some reason the Kickstarter does not fund properly. Is there a contingency plan in place currently where you may actually go towards more of a founders pack system, or something where you're still allowing the backers who really want to help fund this project, allowing them to do so in the future?
Yeah, I'll be totally straight with you. I think you should expect Kickstarter, and then this always happens. There's always late pledges. There's people who missed the Kickstarter and didn't find out in time. And this is why there's all those sites. I think all the Kickstarters have like Kickstarter's over. Now there's late pledges. Now you can go ahead and keep getting the same stuff, but it's not through Kickstarter. And we're going to end up having to do all of that. I'm positive, right? That's just how it works. So yeah, I think it's entirely reasonable to expect a Kickstarter followed by late pledges, followed by pre-sales after that, right? Because we definitely hope, expect, and plan that our total audience is not going to have found us by the end of the Kickstarter. There are more players out there than that. So yeah, I wouldn't expect it's just a Kickstarter and we're done.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually really good that you brought that up, because I think that there's the transparency that you guys have about how you're funding this and how you're doing this is really important. I think that that's a lot of what players want to know, because I think, like you had mentioned before, you initially didn't plan on doing a Kickstarter. And I think at this point it would be a little difficult to say after a successful Kickstarter or even an unsuccessful one, that in order to keep development ongoing or to be fair to all the people who wanted to take part in it, you obviously would want to make those options available. And I think that that's really an important distinction, is that you're letting people know ahead of time that they should probably expect this, because in all honesty, I mean, when you look at other Kickstarter projects, I don't think a lot of people expected 10 years down the line to be spending, $10,000 on a ship or something like that, right? Like, I think that's.
Although we
I'm just
do
pointing
not
that out.
expect anything on any kind of 10-year horizon. That is not. We like to say, this is actually something one of the folks in the Discord said, that this was more of a kick finisher than a Kickstarter. We just aren't in that same boat. We have 5 years of sunk work. The game's playable now. Is it finished? Hell no. We know that. we're not blind to our own incompletion there. But we can see from here an awful lot of what we need to do is pretty clear. Like, we're not moving through fog here, right? Like, we have loads of skill trees to fill out that are endless data tables that Dave and others on the team end up working over. We have loads of art to make, but we have a pretty good picture of what exactly that art needs to be, and so on, right? Like, a lot of this is not unknowns anymore, right? I'm sure there are probably some unknown unknowns, but by and large, we've got a pretty clear sense of what needs to be done to get this to early access. That's not mysterious,
If I can just add to that, like a couple of years ago, when I joined the team, I worked with Raph, and we made a huge mural board of all the systems that needed to get done for the game. And when we were getting the Kickstarters, and then we kind of let it fade because we knew where we were going, but we had that picture in our head all the time. And then we were starting to toy with the idea of doing the Kickstarter. One of the elements of doing the Kickstarter is publishing the roadmap. So I dug out that old hoary mural board, and I was looking at it, and I was going through it, and I was like, oh, we've done a lot. We've done a lot. Like most of the infrastructure systems that we need for the game are in. And that was one of the reasons why we did that big push towards the end of the year last year, was to basically show people like all the stuff that we've done. So yeah, we have a ton of skill trees and combat elements and point of interest systems and all that other stuff still to do. But compared to the hard work that we did earlier, it's fluff. It's a lot of fluff, but it's fluff. I mean, it's just the proc-gen systems that Raph was talking about earlier is really our last big hurdle. Everything else after that is just stuff. Yeah. So we're in a really good position.
I mean, that's always good to hear. What I like to also hear was that you had mentioned something about what somebody said in the Discord. And I think that this is also pretty important because you, I mean, Raph, you've been on our forums talking to our members for a very long time. You're, and you have, firsthand knowledge of, how deep down the rabbit hole some of our members can go with some of this stuff and how excitable, I guess, they can get about some of this stuff.
He's being so politic.
So how does like the influence of the community kind of change how you're going about this Kickstarter and how you're bringing like your community into the mix here and listening to their feedback? I mean, not just on this, but I guess on how development has changed as well.
Gosh, I think so there's a lot of people who are MMO players now who weren't around in 1995 or 6, okay? I've been doing it this way since we were posting on Usenet, right? I've been engaging with players this way since I ran Text Months. When we did, even during the alpha and beta testing for UO, we were, one of the first internet games, period, which meant that we were one of the first ones to post up things like patch notes, right? Having transparency is something that has been, to my mind, critical and crucial to all of this, and is foundational to actually building a community that trusts you, right? If you're not transparent and if you're not honest, it all goes blue. And sometimes, you are forced into an ugly development situation. I'll choose the Galaxy's launch. The Galaxy's launch was a freaking disaster. Okay, it was terrible, just terrible. We on the dev team had asked for more development time, and instead of the year that we asked for, we were given 2 months. And we went to the players, and at that point we had a council of players that were reps. Players picked reps for each of the different professions in the game, and and there was a PvP rep and so on, right? Like reps for each of the big play styles. And we reached out to them and told them, look, our budget's getting cut off. We're going to have to launch early, and it's going to be a mess. And we just told them that. Because, I mean, what else can you do? You can't, it's not like you can just go out and say, no, we meant it to be this way. You can't log in, but it's launched, right? Because you literally couldn't even log in on the first day. And so, yeah, it's so much better to just be honest about everything, right? I think often the players don't know about things like the financial realities of game dev or, what's going on behind the scenes. And sometimes we're legally not allowed to talk about certain things. Like actually, I got yelled at. This is a gossipy inside story. During that time when the Galaxies launched and the game you couldn't log in, it turned out, by the way, it was a hardware failure. One of the hardware load balancers died. That's why people couldn't log in. But for a while, we thought it was the login database, which ran on Oracle. And we actually flew out an Oracle rep to come look at it, right? And I told the players that. And I got like decapitated by my management for saying that. They're like, you can't say that. Oracle might sue us, right? So sometimes, sometimes you're not legally allowed to be fully transparent, but generally speaking, it's just always better. And that way, when you do screw up, and you will, you can at least say, look, I've always been honest with you. Here I am. I'm going to take a public fall and say, yeah, I screwed up. That's okay. We're all people, right? So in the Discord, we've tried to be pretty transparent with one big exception. And that big exception is we're not being fully transparent about all the details of what game systems are coming, because we don't want to overpromise either. And if you overpromise, you get held to it, right? So we've tried to share, but only forward so far, right? Like we've tried to avoid sharing too far out into the distance, because the further out into the distance, the less predictable it gets. I think with the Kickstarter, people are going to expect a roadmap. We are going to share further out into the distance, and we're going to fence it around with caveats saying, and pieces of this could change, because we work in a very iterative way. Feedback from the Discord makes it into the next build all the time, like regularly. And when that happens, it sometimes pushes out something else, because we got to do A or B, and we often prioritize doing what the players suggested over what our internal plans were.
Makes perfect sense. So in that sense, how has the announcement of the Kickstarter been taken by the community in Discord? And I suppose, what is your perception of the Kickstarter announcement outside the Discord as well? Because one of the things that was really interesting that our members kind of pointed out is that if they're in the Discord and if they're following things quite often, then usually they're probably your prime demographic, right? Like, these are the people who are really already like sold on Stars Reach.
Yep.
Which, yeah. So I mean, obviously, like, maybe what you're seeing in the Discord is probably relatively positive, even if they might not have been expecting the Kickstarter. But what have you noticed, I guess, internally and externally, I guess, of your Discord, and how people are looking at, the mention of a Kickstarter and the announcement that it's coming next month?
I would say yes. We assume that the folks who are in there are kind of like core early adopters, and there's a lot of them. Like, to give you an idea, we do a lot of standard measurements of how people are feeling about the game, particularly the testers, right? They're the ones who are really all the way in. And like the positivity ratings for even what's there in pre-alpha are really, really high, right? So we absolutely got plenty of people saying, I don't back Kickstarter. Okay, right? Like, that's fine. We expect that. I think the further out you get from people who are in the know, right? So the testers obviously have maximum visibility. We have 12,500 on the Discord right now, and an awful lot of them actually don't know that much about the game. We get questions like, is this like Ark or is this a sandbox MMO? Right? We get questions like that every day. And a lot of them, it's because they're more recent, but also we haven't always shared out everything that's been going on in the tests, right? That's changing. We're actually merging the test Discord and the public Discord, and we're doing all of our tests publicly now. We lifted the NDA in December, so there's going to be a lot more visibility about what's in the game, which I think a lot of people don't have a lot of awareness of. We saw some folks on Reddit say, oh, well, but they haven't announced any features yet, which is way off, right? Way off. But I mean, that's not their fault. They just haven't been paying close attention. And we haven't necessarily been out there broadcasting. Here's everything that has gone in, which is a long list. I think you've been paying more attention, so there's a long list of stuff that's gone in the last 6 months. So part of our job over the course of this is to broadcast all of that much more. You probably don't know this, but as of right now, we are the #1 trending video game on Kickstarter. We are the #4 trending game on Kickstarter, which includes tabletop. And we're the #5 trending Kickstarter project in general. So I think the excitement is out there, right? I think people do want what we're offering, but we recognize in some ways in MMOs, we've been MMO's best kept secret for a while, right? Like, I think a lot of people don't know what we're already pulling off and that people are already playing. There's a lot of folks out there who are like, oh, I've seen the post. Oh, it's just vaporware. There's nothing playable, and they haven't talked about features yet. Meanwhile, in the Discord, there's people trading tips on, okay, so where exactly do I locate anti-gravium in order to build the grav mesh? Oh, well, have you tried, chronophasing this into that? Or, no, if you go farm the Dark Wizard mushrooms, like, that is what's happening in the Discord. And people on Reddit are like, oh, there's nothing there yet. We just need to tell them. We need to show them. Because there's a lot there.
Just as much as telling, I mean, you can show them. I mean, there are streams happening of the game as well. And I think that's something that even myself, I've only seen snippets of, bits and pieces here because I'm not always available for the streams. And it's not always as much fun to watch them after the stream is over. But I think that's also a really good, way to go about things. But, getting in there, like seeing what people are actually saying about it. So you kind of are aware of what people don't know, which seems to be quite a bit at this point. So I guess in that aspect, I mean, you also have the people who are in your Discord, people who, are outside of your Discord. A lot of people on our forums, they're saying we do not back Kickstarters, right? And I think, like we said when we first started this, there's just so much trepidation behind crowdsourcing MMOs specifically. I mean, there have been a lot of games that have been kickstarted. I mean, there's probably more that have failed, but there's been a lot of games that have been kickstarted and been successful in that way. So like the Divinity Original Sin series got really good. Larian's become what Larian has become. There's a lot of great games that have great studios behind them, and so I think like we're seeing that, but in the MMO space, we're not really seeing that as much. So how do you plan to address potential like backer concerns regarding like the risk associated with crowdfunding, Stars Reach?
I would say the biggest thing is if you go to back an MMO and they're just getting started, and they go out there and they put up their goal for, I don't know, a couple 100,000 or whatever. There's 40 plus million more that will need to come from somewhere. That's the missing chunk that, all of that is needed because everybody knows this is not going to get you there, right? In our case, we have that. And what we're going to need is more like this. And so, it is kind of the reverse situation. That I guess is one of the biggest things that we can say is, look, this is an inverted risk from what you're used to seeing. The fact of the matter, there's all kinds of weird dynamics happening in the industry right now. Costs go up 10x every decade. We are staring in the face of $1 billion AAA games right now, right? And if somebody asks you to kickstart one of those, run away screaming, right? Like, obviously, right? But if you look instead at, an indie game whose budget in aggregate is only a few $1 million, right? Because even indie games these days are still a few $1 million, right? And you are willing to kickstart those, because you perceive the completion risk as being lower, right? Well, I guess the thing I would say is, in terms of our need, we're down at that end. We're not asking for the not only are we not asking for the 40 million, but we don't need the 40 million, right? I think a lot of what people get into trouble with in Kickstarter is they ask for too little because they vastly underestimated, right? So I am not going to tell you that MMOs starting from scratch are not insanely difficult, insanely expensive, and a major risk. All of that is absolutely true when one is near the beginning. So I get it. I mean,
one of the things you asked about, Stephen, was like the Discord folks. They're true believers. They're the ones that love the game and like that. And we have just like thousands and thousands and thousands of people literally that want to play the game that haven't had a chance yet. So what we're trying to do right now, one of the ways that we're trying to convince people out there that it's actually real, is we're trying to throw in buckets and buckets and buckets of new people into the game. And we're going to do that as often as we can, so that those people can come in and go, oh my God, all you people think that this is vaporware. It ain't. It's not that at all. There's a whole game here that needs a lot of polishing. There's a lot of stuff we still need to do, but it's a good game at its core, and that's what we're trying to show to people right now.
I think in regards to that, so I mean, we've seen this a little bit where you guys haven't really hit widespread advertising, right? Like it's not something widespread. But we have started to notice you'll get ads popping up every now and then or something like that. Stars Reach is coming, or join this or read this, or something like that. We've been seeing that more often. So I think like in a lot of ways, it kind of makes sense that people aren't really understanding, I guess the state of the game as it stands right now, right? So post Kickstarter, let's say you're in there, you're funded, how are you guys planning on, I guess, giving people feedback, giving, not just the backers, but everybody else who may have been wondering about, the state of the Kickstarter or the state of maybe like founders packs or something like that. Going forward post Kickstarter, like what can we expect in terms of being kept up to date with what's going on? Is it stuff where they're specifically all going to have to shift on over to that Discord and be part of that to make sure that they're getting like up to date stuff, or will we, like as gaming journalists and streamers and all that, are we going to be getting more information on a more consistent basis? Like what should people expect? Should everyone be on Stars Reach website every day if they want to know what's going on?
You should expect to need to be on the Stars Reach website every day as soon as next week.
Wow. Okay.
Like not post Kickstarter, but like starting nowish. So there's a whole bunch of stuff like that we now feel it's not just because of the Kickstarter, because it's time in general, right? So people should start to expect to see things like weekly lore drops, behind the scenes articles, spotlights of things that players are doing, having fun, post up of things like, hey everybody, here's the outline of the mining system and what the skill tree looks like, and we'd like to take your feedback because here's the shape of it and it's done and mostly in the game now, but we want to hear about what we need to polish up and adjust. All of that is starting like any day now. So yeah, and part of that will include a patch note system. Here are the things we're currently working on. Here are the things that are going into this coming test. Testers have been getting notes for these, but we haven't been telling them very far in advance. We've been telling them only when the test is ready. But, we need to give more visibility about a little bit more down the roadmap, because we are hitting the place where getting player feedback on some things is super, super valuable, right? And so, yeah, you're gonna see a lot more, probably more than you are going to want to cover. Frankly, is going to be starting to come out at a pretty good clip here pretty soon.
I mean, that's not a bad thing. The more that players get to see, the more they know what's going on with the game. And on that note, I'd like to shift to a few of the things about the game that I know that our readership has had questions about. I personally had questions about, and stuff that.
Let's talk game.
Perfect, because the first thing on the list is PvP, because I know that is a hot button issue with a lot of people. Some people love it, some people hate it. I am on both sides. I both love and hate it. So I think let's start with just the overall philosophy on PvP and Stars Reach. I mean, some people are concerned, are you going to have it and to what extent? Is it a core value or is it an afterthought? What are we looking at here in terms of PvP in Stars Reach?
It is not an afterthought, okay? However, the core of the game is PvE first, with PvP being more of an elder game for players who choose to participate in. So it is entirely opt-in. Now, one of the things that players are very worried about, including some of our testers, by the way, is, wait a minute, you have this super dynamic world. Isn't it hard to block all of the ways to harm people? And the answer to that is, yes, it is hard. And we have been, this is a lot of what we've been doing in testing, because we have asked testers, please don't grief one another, because it's so easy to do at first, right? More and more things have gone in. So, for example, now we now have homestead security. You can't mess up somebody's homestead and the building that they've built and that kind of thing in most ways right now. There are some things which are just part of the environmental simulation, okay, that we cannot fully block off. And I'll give you an example. If you build a home and it has a basement and it has earthen walls in the basement and there is a flood, and it doesn't matter if it's player caused or not. If water gets in your basement, those earth walls are going to collapse and your basement's going to fill with mud. That's just how the game works. So can we tell if a given flood was caused by a player? Not necessarily. It could be caused by the weather, right? Or it could be caused by a player quite by accident. And this is a real story because this happened during the test. This actually happened.
I think that you had a story about this on your personal site.
On my blog. That's
yeah,
right.
Okay. So if you could tell us what happened there, because I didn't get to read the entire thing. I read pieces of it, but I didn't get to finish it. So if you could tell me,
sure.
that'd be great.
It started, players were building a city called Beanstalk City on a planet called Gaiamar, which is sort of Hawaii-like. It's volcanic and tropical and that kind of thing. And it has a bunch of crater lakes scattered around where there's a crater with water in it. And players, it's volcanic down below, right? And so a lot of players figured out that if you tunnel straight down from a crater lake, or in fact any of the lakes, the water will go down until it meets lava and turn into a steam geyser. And when that happens, that geyser is real. It is hot water, hot steam, and it goes up in the air and it floats away and it cools down and it comes down other places and puts puddles everywhere. And those puddles actually erode the stone a little bit, and they do this, okay? This is how the game works. And as part of the magic of the game is the fact that this happens, right? Which means that one of the first things people do is go make geysers because it's like, oh, holy shit, that's cool. But this meant that water started getting all over the city. So, because we really liked this city, a couple of us got together and we contributed our homesteads to the town, basically, and covered one of the crater lakes so that they were privately owned, and you couldn't do that to them. Because you can't do that to a privately owned area. Okay? We covered it up, and just to be safe, we lined the bottom of the lake with blocks, with impervious blocks. Unfortunately, there was a tree growing in one corner. And that corner, the roots, the blocks didn't meet. And as a result, when, the geyser meant that the lake was gone, right? Like the water wasn't there anymore. When I refilled the lake, it leaked. And it leaked through the entire city. And it got in all the basements. And the basements that were lined were all fine. But there were a couple of basements that had dirt walls. One person in particular had built an amazing one with, they used glass blocks and columns, and they planted bamboo down below, so it looked like you were in a bamboo thicket in their basement. It was super cool. It disintegrated. It just collapsed. Their whole basement was full of mud. And so a few of us then ended up spending several hours mucking out everybody's basement, which was super cool, but it was an accident, right? Now, can we prevent that? You do have to build somewhat defensively. If you build by the side of water and the water level rises, water's going to get in your house. That's just how the game works. So we can't protect against everything. Can we protect against, and this is a real thing, against a player taking, we have a very powerful advanced mining tool called a chronophaser that, among other things, lets you heat rock up to lava. Okay, because when the lava solidifies, it often becomes a different kind of rock. So players can transmute rocks in a bunch of ways. Currently, you can open a lava pit under someone's feet. It won't be that way once we're done. Okay? Right now, you can't. We've cased out shooting directly at them with this beam. It does nothing. We have not cased out doing it 2 feet in front of them. Right? That's not hard to case out. It's actually the exact same thing that we did with the homesteads. We just haven't done it yet. So in the meantime, we say to the testers, just don't do that. We know we're going to get it, but So we can case out all of the forms of direct and reasonably indirect harm, right? But if somebody starts a forest fire and you run into the forest, I can't save you, man. You probably catch fire, and we are not necessarily going to be able to blame the arsonist directly, right? For one thing, it could have been a meteor started that fire, right? It doesn't necessarily have to have been a player. So all of this boils down to, yes, the environment offers ways for players to get hurt. Players will have ways to protect against that hurt, such as lining their basements or whatever. There's also layers of that control. Players can control their homestead. Towns can control their town. A planet government can control their planet and say, look, unless you have a license to use your heat beam, you can't do it at all. Okay? That kind of thing. And then they could say, only people who live here are allowed to do that. Right? Because they're kind of members of the guild. Right? And so you're willing to trust them.
It's really interesting. It gives you a lot of options.
There's a large element of gameplay there, too. If you're going to build on a floodplain, you should expect floods. You're going to build in a forest, you should worry a little bit about forest fires. Those sorts of things. Those are, they mirror the real world. So they're logical things when they happen. Like, for instance, people occasionally will be digging underground, and they don't realize, because they're used to other games where you just dig and it makes a solid hole and you go into it. But in our game, the dirt or gravel or whatever it is, if you're digging through that, it flows and it starts to fill in the hole. Well, if somebody just charges into that hole, all of a sudden they're buried alive, and their character dies, and they're like, "What just happened?" And then they figure it out, and they're like, "Oh, that's actually really cool," And so there's a lot of gameplay that comes with trying to anticipate how the world will react, and how you can build against that. That is a really fun element. Now, when it comes to players griefing other players, we want to stop it. But when it comes to the environment reacting the way that it should, we absolutely do not.
We also do have forward plans for actual PvP. Okay? players who control a planet, our goal is to allow them to set the PvP rules for that planet. We have built into the lore a three-cornered faction.
PvP. That's what we're talking about, was PvP.
That's right. Yeah, not just three things. So yeah, in the lore there is a three-cornered faction system built in for future factional warfare stuff, and we'd like to do things like the faction perks and point stuff that was in Galaxies. We have plans for guild types. And we're going to start with just ordinary guild types, but the plan is to have a dedicated PvP guild type, so that they can be ranked against one another and that kind of thing. So you can do guild versus guild stuff. So we do have all of those plans. However, we see it as an elder game, and PvE first is the target.
Understand.
And I just realized how long we've gone. I am going to have to drop off in 2 minutes.
Yeah, I was about to say that. No, I totally understand. That was
You
kind
could
of.
keep going with Dave, maybe.
Well, I only have. I mean, it's actually kind of funny because you answered a lot of my questions about the terraforming and stuff as well. How you're going to, I guess, stop the potential to grief and so on and so forth. I mean, I did have some questions about that. How your architecture's working. I mean, this is supposed to be like, shardless, right? And obviously, when there's a single instance, you've got everybody kind of like going everywhere. I mean, it can be pretty crazy. So you've kind of talked a little bit about like how you're planning on limiting that. I guess like since we are just about up on time, I think the last question that I would really have is for you guys in relation to, let's say that you are interested in Stars Reach. Let's say that you are not comfortable with backing the Kickstarter. What ways would they be able to help you guys in the sense of, I mean, maybe it's showing interest or maybe there's something else. How could they get involved, I guess, to maybe help you along even if it's not going to be monetarily?
I mean, resharing, spreading the word, obviously. I won't lie. The email newsletter for the next little bit is going to be pretty Kickstarter heavy, as you might expect. Real talk. If people really are curious, participate on the subreddit. There's an official subreddit. Help spread the word to the larger subreddits. Like, I don't see us mentioned that much on MMORPG subreddit. Get us a dedicated subforum on MMORPG.com. Right now, there's just random threads here and there, right? Heck, we'd start cross-posting all our updates there to that forum if there were one. It doesn't feel right to just spam the pub with it, right? Like, we want to be good guests. I'll give away something that might be obvious, but there will be a Kickstarter tier that is just hand over some money with no expectation of anything because I want to be supportive. That one, there's no commitment back. So, if people are comfortable with that, there is that, of course. We don't have anything like a Patreon or whatever. We don't have that. If people are accredited investors, they could certainly reach out. We're always happy to talk to folks like that.